Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you for returning to my channel. I want to show you a game from the round seven of the present tournament that's going on, the Grand Swiss tournament that's being held in Latvia. There's many games to choose from. This game I chose again it's from round seven. It's between young Grandmaster Alireza Firouzja with the white pieces and Evgeniy Najer with the black pieces rated 2654. This game impressed me because it is really showing a maturity in Alireza's play. This is not just some tactical melee where his youth and energy just overwhelms older opponent, but he shows really mature play in a quiet, rather drawish system, and just finds minute chances to keep the game moving. Reminding me of like Karpov or Kramnik in nature. So enjoy the game. Please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe, and definitely check the links below after the video. There's always some good stuff in those links down there, and please consider supporting the channel. So again, Alireza, white pieces, Evgeniy Najer, black pieces, Petroff, great weapon of chess, right up there with the Rui Lopez Sicilian defense. Of course, Petrov is it's known for years. It's basically like a drawish type opening. Kramnik was a great exponent of it back in the days. Before him in the 80s was Artur Yusupov. But the Petrov every now and then will make an appearance. Firouzja plays d4. So he switches it up. Instead of going into the main lines with knight takes e5, he plays d4 here. Alright. It's like a sideline of the Petrov. Nevertheless, game quickly goes into an equal position here. Knight takes e4, d takes e5. d5 is played, knight bd2, challenging the knight on e4, knight takes d2, bishop takes d2, bishop e7, c3 is played here, c5, and now bishop d3. And now you can see one of the reasons behind the move c3, that on c4 the bishop doesn't just have to go back to e2 or bishop f1, but can go to c2, and also in some cases the queen will come to b3. Knight c6, castles, and bishop g4, rook to e1, and queen d7. So right here you can see black has easy development, nice presence in the center, and that's why the game is equal. So you might say, well, why would modern grandmasters play into a position like this? Listen, most positions today, pretty much like this, equal positions. You go into the Rui Lopez, Berlin Wall, Sicilian defense. No matter where you go, London system, right? It's really not about the evaluation anymore. That's like a 80s. 90s like Kasparov way of looking at chess, where in those days players will try to get an advantage, a small advantage right out of the opening, and carry that through with precision. That was like Kasparov style. He would get these, he would research the openings very thoroughly. Of course, he had a big team of Soviet analysts. He was the first grandmaster to really benefit from the computer engine era, and get that small advantage, and then just play super accurately, and eventually wind up converting. Nowadays, especially under the Magnus Carlsen reign, you see more of players not being afraid to go into these like equal or drawish type looking positions from the opening. It's more about the plans and the strategic choices that is going to be made as the game goes on. It's more about who has better comfort in the position, right? So chess is definitely advanced in these concepts, and especially with Alpha Zero and Leela and things like that. Chess is definitely advanced in the way that the game is being approached. So you look at this game and okay, black looks fine, but let's see what happens. Queen D7 was played by black. H3, and black plays bishop H5. Already, black is facing an important decision here. If he takes the knight, which would be anti-positional, because first of all, will be giving up the bishop pair for nothing, and also will be helping white with his development after queen takes F3. And then the rook on A1 can slide over to D1, putting more pressure on the center. But just to show you how dangerous a position can get in a hurry, let's say black decides to castle queen side, and with the idea of throwing his pawns forward on the king side, game is over with bishop F5 due to the weakness on the light squares. If he castles king side, bishop F5, queen really has no good square, because if queen C7, then just bishop comes to F4 with the idea of playing E6, discovered attack on the queen. So queen D8, E6 anyway, and black is already in trouble in this position. After say capture, bishop takes with check on E6, king moves, and then queen D5. So just like that, a little error and just capturing the knight on F3 could lead to disaster already. So bishop H5 is played, bishop F4, and now queen E6. This move right here is interesting because queen E6 to me is showing that black is already a little bit uncomfortable in the position. He has to worry about the D pawn first of all, and also he has to worry about the advance of the E pawn to E6 at a certain point. All right, queen is not a good blockading piece. Queen is too important to be used in that manner. So the fact that black already has to put the queen on E6, it is to me like is kind of ominous. All right, black would love to be able to play D4 or something like that, but again, it will be too premature as he hasn't completed his development. So for instance, D4, right, with the idea of course to create a 3-2 pawn majority on the queen side, but white would just simply play bishop E2, and now if the pawn captures on C3, then queen takes, and now black has lost his right to castle. So for instance, D takes C3, queen takes, rook A D1, good for white. Let's say bishop takes F3 here to take some pressure off D4. Bishop takes, and now castles, and now white launches a great plan of moving the bishops out of the way so that the kingside pawns can advance. All right, so the basic plan of white here would be to play bishop G4 afterwards, and then F4, perhaps lock up the center with say playing C4, and then launch the kingside attack. Okay, because this is something that you should know if you don't know it already, that in the middle game, it's more beneficial to have a kingside pawn majority, and so that you can attack the king. In the end game, it's not such a big deal because the king is close to the extra pawn. right? That's why in the end game, a queenside majority is usually better because the king is further away, and the king usually has to race over. The king that has a minority usually has to race over to stop the opposing pawn, and this creates problems whereby that pawn can be used as a decoy, etc., etc. But in the middle game, the king side pawn majority is usually more advantageous because you can attack with it. So keep that in mind as we go continue in this game. So bishop f4 was played, queen e6, and now bishop e2. Castle. Okay, and things look normal enough. Queen d2. But as you can see, there's all types of threats slowly creeping up in the position. Okay, and to me, this is a mark of a true master because the position, I've highlighted this, and I'm sorry if it's too much, but I want everybody to see everything. This position looks innocent enough. It looks like black is just fine. Rook comes to e8, the other rook comes to d8. Maybe you play a pawn to a6, b5 eventually, and everything's, black is okay. He has nice representation in the center. All right. But simple move like queen d2, connecting the rooks, right? On the verge of completing his development. Firouzja has a threat. One of the threats is knight g5. Remember, I told you that the queen is not really a good blockading piece. Okay? Because it's so important that it can be attacked and driven away. Ideally, you would want a knight to be on e6, or even the bishop to the light square bishop to be on e6. This is also what was important about the move h3 earlier, attacking the bishop, because it forced the bishop to h5. Or more correctly to say, it forced the bishop to declare itself. What diagonal are you going to be on? Right? Because the bishop could have surely returned and stayed on the c8 to h3 diagonal. h3 forces the bishop, or like they used to say in the old chess manuals, asking the bishop the question. What are you going to do? So the bishop's driven off c8, h3 diagonal, stays on h5. Now the queen is stuck with the blockading duties. Not only does the queen have to blockade the e6 pawn, but also it's protecting the d5 pawn. All right? These are duties that the queen would not like to do. So in this position, white is threatening knight g5. And of course, with a discovered attack on the bishop on h5, and also the idea of bringing the rook from a1 to d1, attacking the d5 pawn, and that's why those 3 squares are highlighted in red. Okay, all in that one move, queen d2. This is what white is bringing to the table, and this explains black's next move. So he plays bishop g6 to avoid the discovery on the bishop. But notice already black has made 3 moves with the bishop. All right. Now you might say it's not too bad because the position is still relatively close. However, we'll see in the follow-up. Better here for white. Better here for black is to play smooth rook a e8, putting more pressure. Right now, there's no threat against the e pawn, but the pressure is building up because you got to remember that pawn on e5 is very strong, very annoying. It creates a wedge in the position. Think King's Indian attack, right? Creating that wedge in the position, and eventually, if allowed to stay put, white is either going to create a pass pawn, or he's going to start to conduct a kingside attack at some point. That's his general plan when the pawn is on e5. Alicon was a great master of this. Pawn on e5 is definitely indicative of kingside attack. So rook a e8 is a way of basically sending out warning signals like, yes, I'm going to destroy this pawn. All right. So play could go rook a e8, knight d4. Great move tactically, because remember I told you about the discovery against that bishop right there. So black takes, bishop takes h5, d takes c3. Okay. and B takes C3. Now, I think this is why I think Nayer saw this line but rejected it, because I think he saw himself with the isolated pawn. He probably went about this far and probably, rejected the line. Okay? And you might say, well, why not queen takes, if queen takes C3, then bishop B4, forking skewering the queen and rook. I think if Nayer took his calculations a little further, he would have chosen this line. And I'll keep going. So B takes C3 is forced, and now D4, and black gets rid of his problem with the isolated pawn. Now it's no longer a problem. Right? So he trades some pieces off, he gets rid of the isolated pawn. Again, the idea is if C takes D4, then just bishop B4, skewing the rook and queen. So bishop G4, queen C3, and you can see black is counterattacking effectively. C takes, anyway, bishop B4, queen C1. It's a long line, of course, so there's, of course, different moves can be made, but I'm just trying to illustrate this idea. Queen D4, all right, so material is even. Rook D1, bishop A3, and you can see the game is very, dynamically balanced. There's a lot of activity, but it's balanced, right, in this particular line. Okay, and then eventually white gets his pawn back after rook takes B7, knight takes D4, H takes D4, and then rook D8, and I'll end it right there. But you can see how the game dynamically equal, right? A lot of action, but eventually we see that black is able to equalize. To me, this move was his best chance, but I can fully understand why he opted for bishop G6. If he doesn't see that he can really get rid of the isolated pawn, if somehow he might think that he's going to be bogged down with the isolated pawn, I can see him rejecting that, because he has a different idea to protect his D pawn. So, after rook AD1, he plays bishop E4. Rook AD8 is playable here, but again, knight G5 happens, bishop takes, and you can see the bishop is harassing the rook there. F6 is not going to cut it. Okay, that's actually a bad move. So rook D7 has to be played if you want to keep the D pawn. And then bishop C4, very powerful tactics in the position, because now the rook is under protected. Therefore, D takes C4 will lose to queen D7, lose the exchange. So this is why Nayer played bishop E4. All right, which to me looks kind of awkward. Knight G5 by Firouzja. Bishop takes G5, bishop takes G5. So now white is gaining the bishop here. All right, and now he plays the move D4. So this is Firouzja. Nayer's idea is to advance the pawn D4, and after all, black would love, C takes D4, and knight takes D4, and we can be happy. He can be happy that he's fully equalized. Let me also state that if black decides to grab this pawn on E5, for example, knight takes E5, then we could see the problems that I mentioned earlier with the queen being exposed on E6. As you can see, beginning with the move F3, bishop G6, F4, let's say H6, black tries to, counterattack. Bishop simply moves back, knight C6, and now you see the queen just exposed. And then after bishop G4, the queen will move somewhere, but the D pawn will fall. Okay? Same thing after the move queen takes e5. After f3, again, the queen moves somewhere. The bishop moves first, say to g6. And then there's a discovery against the queen. The queen has, bishop c4. You have 3 pieces attacking d5. After the queen moves, the pawn falls. This is why Najer avoided that move. Instead, he played d4, hoping to resolve his problems differently. Okay, let me just segue real quick to say this. This is a jewel that you can add to your chess knowledge. Nimzovich said in the book Blockade that there are 3 main reasons for a pawn advance in the center. And one is to create a wedge in the position. Again, think of a King's Indian attack, or even this particular position. Earlier though, before the pawn was surrounded like that. But creating a wedge in the position where you divide the board in half. 2, open enemy lines. And you kind of see that a little bit after this move, knight takes e5. You see the lines being open. Except in this variation, the pawn was actually captured. So it's like a poison pawn. But nevertheless, you can see illustrated opening enemy lines. And the third reason is to restrict enemy pieces. Those are the basic 3 reasons for the pawn advance in the center. How do you restrict the enemy pieces? Well, if you notice, knight cannot land on f6 safely, and also d6 here. But this is why this lays the conditions for a kingside attack, because there's less defense for the black king. So just keep that in mind when you're playing. So d4 was played, and Firouzja plays bishop f1, which is kind of probably the first move that's a little slow that he made, but he's still attacking the bishop right on e4. All right. Better is probably bishop to b5, a little more active, and not only does it challenge the bishop, but it threatens c takes d4 and rook takes e4. So for instance, bishop b5, a6, takes. Now you capture. C takes, queen takes on a2, rook e3. And then from here, although material is even, you can see that white can start to amass his pieces on the king side to kind of take advantage of black's low in development, and with this queen offside on a2. Note that in this position, black can't play rook to d8, either rook, because of the bishop's position on g5 controlling the d8 square. So here I think bishop b5 was a little stronger. But bishop f1, queen g6. So Najer repositions the queen, and just creating pressure on g2 at some point. And of course, ultimately he wants to be able to take the e pawn. So queen f4, protecting the e pawn and increasing the pressure on the bishop. So now that the bishop is threatened. Bishop c2, attacking the rook. Another move that was probably better here, and it's hard again to blame Najer for making this move, as it is attacking the rook. But the bishop on c2 will end up out of play. All right, and this is very important because I told you at the beginning of the game to think about the king side attack. And this bishop being out of play is not conducive to defense, right? The queen, remember, the queen is not really made to be really defending the king side like that, all right? So better, with that in mind, is bishop f5, staying close to the king, but also counterattacking with ideas of, say after h6, for instance, forcing the bishop to move, then bishop h3, okay? right? Gives a little more counterplay to black. Not gonna go through my whole line there. Bishop c2, rook d2, and now rook ae8. Bishop h4. All right. So this is a start of a grand plan by Alireza to start attacking on the queen side. So he's clearing the space, right? So he can play like g4 and things like that. All right. He's gonna maneuver his bishops to where they can contribute to the attack on the king side. King h8, and I feel like this is the first move in the game where I feel like it was kind of a complete waste of time that Najer played. Again, he had to try to play a move like bishop f5. Again, protect his king. f6 is dangerous. It's playable, but it's dangerous, right? You're giving up this passed pawn in the position. But then maybe you could play d3 yourself. It's double-edged. I still think white is better. Okay, I have to say like bishop g3, knight e5, queen e3. Right, of course the idea is f4 here. And let's say knight c4, and then bishop d3 is very strong move. King h8 is the first move I feel like is really, running out of ideas perhaps, or losing the thread on the position. f3, again, it looks, if you don't know what's the plan, it looks kind of like, man, f3. But like I said, he's gonna move the dark square bishop. He's gonna basically reposition the bishop, right? First of all, on f2 to attack the dark squares in the center, right? Get rid of black center, and then attack on the king side. So a6, bishop f2, rook d8. Okay. Rook c1, double attack on the rook. I'm sorry, on the bishop. Bishop to b1, c takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, c takes d4, and not the immediate capture of the pawn, but just a3 protecting the pawn. And now we see on the board black's nightmare come true, which is ending up with an isolated pawn without any compensation for it, as far as like dynamic attacking chances, control over files, or anything like that. Bishop a2, there's the bishop out of play, as I mentioned before. With this bishop out of play now white is poised to play moves like bishop d3, etc., etc. Instead, Alireza just grabs the pawn, so now he's just up a pawn basically for nothing. Black pins the rook, right, and attacks b2 at the same time. Rook c d1 takes care of that, and it also prevents black from playing queen takes b2, because then rook takes d8. Rook fe8, getting out of the pin. Rook takes, queen takes. So just going into the endgame, offering the endgame at this point. Queen takes, rook takes d4. And this is why I said Firouzja's play is very mature, right? He's not just hell-bent on the attack. That was the original plan, right? But eventually he broke black, and black eventually lost a pawn, and now he's choosing the safest route to victory, right? Just convert the pawn advantage. g5, of course, if rook takes e5 here, rook d8, and then it's going to be checkmate after rook e8, rook takes e8. So g5, all right, preventing or trying to slow white's advance down, trying to keep white from playing f4, connecting the pawns. Rook d7. I like how, again, mature play by Alireza. He doesn't go passive. He's still attacking. He says, go ahead, take the e pawn. I'm gonna eat you up on the 7th rank. b5. a6. He's attacking a6 now. Rook takes e5. Rook takes A6 still up a pawn, so now he has a 2-1 majority on the queen side. All right, and a weak isolated pawn to attack. Bishop c4, easy simplification, and gives white a clear pass pawn. A4, rook c5, and I'll just go through the rest of the game with little commentary here as Alireza just converts to endgame. Very simple endgame to convert. Okay. And the old technique. Notice how the king is cut off by the rook on the f file, and Alireza maintains that position as long as possible. And now the plan is very simple: is to bring white rook up to the 7th rank, come to the b file, and that way the white king can come to b8 and promote the spawn. So rook c7 here comes to the second rank. This allows the white king to evacuate himself. He doesn't mind giving up the pawn. Check. Why check? Because, of course, with the pawn advanced on h5, black is willing to play rook a3 and just sacrifice the rook, with the idea of, pushing this pawn down the h file and queening, and white would have to give up his rook. So this is why he checks first. Now the king comes out, and now the sacrifice is stunted by rook a6. Check. King c7. And of course, there's no way that black can stop the pawn from queening. As say for instance rook c3 check, the king can just start marching toward the rook. Okay, because the rook on a6 is going to stay there and just promote. Okay, soon as the check stop. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that game. I know the analysis was a little long, but it was a rich game, and I wanted to make sure I brought out every thing I could, so that the game will truly be educational to you, to even like beginning player, that they see all the threats, all the tactics and plans in the position. And I didn't even share like all my analysis. I mean, the video will be like 2 hours long. I try to give like little short lines here and there, right? I know a lot of people like those little short 10-12 minute videos, and I will try to cut them a little shorter. But this game was so good that I just wanted to share it with everybody. So anyway, please like and subscribe, hit that thumbs up button. Please consider supporting my channel by using the links below. There's also DVDs in those links below, books, and I always try to post the links with the books and DVDs related to the opening that you see on the board today. So today is Petroff, so below you should find links, DVDs, books related to Petroff. So enjoy, and I'll see you guys on the next video.